want to welcome everybody to listening to our podcast today. I'm Joe Gig Werks. I'm the managing partner of Gig Werks. And with me is Christian Holzlin, our enterprise architect. And Christian and I have been working together 17 years now, building solutions principally around Microsoft. And what we want to discuss here today is Microsoft 365, how the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, right? That classically, historically, people have looked at Microsoft platforms as sort of separate, almost silos, right? You have Exchange, you have SharePoint, you know, SQL, and they're different stack components. But the real power of M365 is really the ability to create comprehensive solutions, bringing together all those disparate components. On a very large measure, Teams is the embodiment of that, where it's really a front end, right, to these other products, be it Exchange, the use of Azure AD, its wire up to SharePoint, the ability to post bots and queries. And so today we're going to be having a discussion around that topic generally, and we'll probably have some follow-up podcasts therein. So, Christian, let's start with you. You're the expert with Inside the Shop. What do you see as some of the big benefits of moving from on-prem to M365? And why did they rename it to that?
Why did they rename it to Microsoft 365?
Yeah, I have my
Well,
view.
right. I mean, it used to be Office 365, and then as the platform evolved, what we all realized and what we saw, firsthand working with a lot of our customers, helping them build these solutions where they're bringing in all these different technologies. Office is not the only piece of it, right? So you're not just talking about Word documents or Excel files, right? When you're talking about Office, you're talking about Microsoft 365. You have Teams, SharePoint, you have Azure Active Directory, you have Exchange Online, you have Groups, you have Power
CRM,
BI, you have the whole Power
Dynamics.
Platform, you have CRM, you have Dynamics, right? There's a massive host of products now that are all integrated. They all sit on top of Azure AD. And so it's more appropriate to really call it M365, to call it Microsoft 365, because it's the platform that you're using. It's not just the components of it. And this is the whole point behind our podcast is, so you have all these different tools that you're used to sort of like individually using. Where do you get a lot of value out of bringing these together? And what are the kind of use cases that are relevant for most of our organizations that we worked with, for a lot of our customers?
And that evolution has really led to the ability to build comprehensive solutions that even like Power BI is the example I always like to give. Where do you want to post it? Do you want to post it in a SharePoint site? Do you want to go right to Power BI itself? Do you want to fetch it with a bot out of Teams? Right. So it's this
Absolutely.
notion of, it's all these disparate components, but where does the user? And I think that's a big part of the M365 story, is where is it best for the user to live? To get business value, right? Which, when you looked at it as silo components, meant clicking into different browsers versus, well, we have these elements where we're getting data, we're presenting it, we're triggering workflows. What's the appropriate entree point, right, for end users to make the sense of something that spans several of those platform components? Fair?
And Power BI specifically, actually, the reason why that particular example that you chose is so critical when you're talking about the cloud versus the on-prem, so like classic environment that we used to work with. When we were building on-prem solutions, the hardest part of the entire delivery was, how do we build the reporting engine for these people? Where do we put the reporting UX, right? And you had to, install SSRS in SharePoint mode and do some
Right.
complex integrations and set up a bunch of Kerberos authentic. I mean, it was wildly complicated. And now the easiest part of the solution now is Power BI. It's like, oh, well, that's where it goes, right? And you can put a Power BI tab in Teams, right? With next to a SharePoint page tab in Teams, or you can put a Power BI report on a SharePoint page, and you can integrate all of these assets together and get them all from one place, right? And Teams really being the vehicle that's driving that, you know, that's why I love that you bring up Power BI, because now you have access to that, and it's so easy to put together reports and charting and doing analytics with all of that data, because not only is the user experience there where it really wasn't before, it was much more difficult to get, working before. Now it's seamless, and under the hood, Power BI will natively connect all these places and pull data for you without you having to do anything other than say, go get it, right? You can get SharePoint list data, you can get Dataverse data, you can get data from Azure SQL, you can get it from, a website, right? Anywhere that you need, you can just mash it up together and put it into a report. And that's really, really useful. So it's, how do you take that power of that one tool and then drive value with the whole stack, right? With like, Power Automate, Power Apps, Teams, all of this stuff working in concert to give your users the solution that they need to execute their day-to-day work more efficiently with a high ROI.
Yeah, and two or three things I would pivot from that as well is, for one, we don't have to get to it right now. Well, not the Dataverse. It's the Dataverse, right? Sorry. So
Right.
the
Yeah. The
role,
Dataverse. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. So, we were talking about Power BI here briefly. I think the Dataverse itself, and then just if you shed a little more detail on it, is also very, very representative of this concept Microsoft is pushing in the marketplace of universal connection across these different components to build
Right.
scalable business solutions.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Dataverse is, we're at a moment in time now where we have a cloud-based sort of agnostic, platform agnostic data storage backend. So the challenge with any application, with any solution, with any user experience that you're trying to build is, where do you persist the state of that user experience, right? I log in to anything, right? And then I'm getting half my work done and then I have to go eat lunch, or my colleague calls me and I have to go, meet a customer or something, right? And I'm in the middle of everything, right? Where do you store that information, right? How does it get persisted? And traditionally it's, well, we hire a development team and they build the database and we use ADO.NET and blah blah blah, right? And you have to build your own backend. The Dataverse is a fantastic solution in that you can now create a data backend on the fly for anything you need and plug into it from anywhere across the M365 stack. And so you can create a user experience in a SharePoint web part that writes into a Dataverse table that gets pulled into a Power Automate flow that processes data from a chat bot that sends an answer to a vendor in real time, right? With no human interaction, and everything's done like instantaneously, right? Whereas before, you'd have to set up all of those connection points and you'd have to build all of that stuff yourself, and now it's here, it's just sitting there for you. So that's what I see as the biggest value for the Dataverse. And from a developer's perspective as well, it's like it has a really nice design surface where you can go in and very clearly build out a hierarchy of information, tables of data with fields, and set it up and it's yours, and it's malleable over time, you can work with it. That's a big selling point for the Dataverse. It really sort of underpins the whole entire platform.
Right, and I thought it was very much where they were going and then finally got to, if you will, right? So for everything they've been working toward, this comprehensive set of tools, basically, to build more powerful, integrative business solutions with ROI. The Dataverse was sort of the last mile, at least as it stands, to really bring that full power together. Is that
Right.
fair?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's the connective tissue that allows the applications to talk to each other without having to sort of mysteriously send data back and forth. It's that common language underneath that allows the applications to communicate seamlessly.
Yeah, and at a later juncture, because we want to cover sort of broad topics here, but it strikes me it would be good to have a separate conversation around the Dataverse itself. I think it warrants its own kind of conversation separately. Do you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, it's something we really need to get into in detail. We should definitely do, an episode on it because we can cover a lot of ground just talking about, if you're not using it, why should you? And what are the things that you should know about it? But yeah, I mean, here, of course, what we want to do is we really want to focus on what are the solutions, what are the use cases that make, that the Dataverse make possible, and how can you take advantage of them in your organization?
And all these other tools. And one quick question statement before we get to some of those solution use cases we'd like to frame, and then we can go into further depth on subsequent podcasts. The other thing about Power BI, we're talking about on-prem a moment again, and all the hoops you'd have to go through. And that was sort of the glory days of Tableau. And Tableau, had a superior, user interface and all that stuff, which it doesn't now. And so aside from the fact that Tableau is just flat out more expensive than Power BI, it cannot do what we described as the value of sticking that report in the appropriate place for people to interact with. And so again, kind of a separate conversation around Power BI versus Tableau, although I don't even think it's much of a conversation at this point. It would be like a conversation between WordPerfect and Word. I don't think many people care anymore. Just to be honest with you, that ship has
Yeah, I
sailed.
agree.
But that I just wanted to throw that in as well. So, why don't you describe just a couple of typical use cases where you see the stack coming together and what some of those components are?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite ones. This is a personal favorite of mine because it ties into customer service. One of my favorite use cases, we refer to this in our notes here as the rapid dissemination of information. And that sounds kind of general, right? But the whole purpose of having this stack of applications is that each application within the stack provides a discrete role for you to then get information about your job in a faster, quicker way, right? And the purpose of that, right, is to improve the ROI, right? Is to improve your customer service um, to your customers, right? So one of my favorite use cases of this is working at a customer service like a call center, for example. You may be working at a call center that's either virtual, like you're like a chatbot based call center, or you're working at a physical call center where you're getting phone calls from your customers directly. And one of the use cases that we see that's very frequent around this is, well, how do I know who I'm talking to, right? And what does it mean to know who you're talking to? So somebody calls you on the phone, right? Now, if you have Teams integration with telephony, now you can snag that caller ID and you can run that through, for example, like a Power Automate flow, and you can get like a quick report about who's calling you, right? Or if you're not using Teams telephony, you could, for example, set up a chatbot where you type in the name of the person that called you and it goes out to the Power Platform and it runs a flow and grabs a Power BI report and then sends you like a little dashboard of here's all the information about the person you're talking to. And one thing, this particular scenario, the M365 platform is extremely good at doing this now, where you have these real-time tools like the Power Virtual Agents, which is the chat implementation. You can put together, basically using a WYSIWYG editor, a chat flow that says, if I go in and I type this, I want you to go run a flow that goes and looks up that information, sends it back, and then asks me what I'm looking for, and then goes out to Power BI and gets a report, and then sticks it in a chat window in Teams, right? And that can all happen like nearly real time. And so you can make these business critical decisions where you have time sensitive information that you need to get your hands on. And especially in cases like with customer service, call centers like that, where you want to know who you're chatting with, that information is the most valuable information that you can get. And the faster you can get it, the more effective you're going to be at your customer service. And the more effective you're with customer service, the longer you're going to retain your accounts and clients, and the more likely they are to trust you and to continue working with you. And so this is a very easy way of saying you can take a look at M365 and see how it directly impacts in a positive way your customer relationship management
And if I
by
could,
helping you. Please go ahead, Joe, jump
yeah,
in.
and a couple of things on that too. So for one, if you use like CRM, a lot of CRMs, Microsoft CRM, you'll get that phone number, the CRM record of the person will pop up, right? So you go, well, what if I just use something bespoke? Question is twofold. Well, a question and a comment, kind of. Yes, but what if you also want to get financial information on them that exists in another and disparate accounting system? And you want to fetch documents about that person that may not be stored in CRM because CRM, it's got document capabilities, but in terms of its structure and extensibility, a lot of times that's not being stored, or a lot of content wouldn't be stored. So it's the ability to take even native bespoke functionality and frankly extend what kind of data or information you could pull back. Right? Is that a accurate statement, Christian?
That's a perfect scenario for this type of application topology where you're bringing in all of these different applications where you have Dynamics as your CRM that's giving you your customer profile data. You have your invoicing system, right, which could be a third
The
party
SAP.
that has
Let's face it.
right, like SAP, right? And maybe you're using a Power BI data gateway to get that information, right? So you have Power Automate and a flow that runs in real time and queries your on-prem infrastructure, or that's sitting in an Azure SQL database, queries it in out of SQL Azure, and then Power BI gets that, turns it into a PDF, and sends it to you in a chat. And you're sitting in Teams, and this all happens instantly, right?
Right, and you
You
get
type
that
in somebody's
summary
first and
report they
last
can
name,
send right out. Right.
poof, right? And that, it's hard to beat that, right?
And,
When
and
you
the
need
part
something instantaneously and it can do that for you.
and the part two of this I want to stress as well, or at least it's my belief that customer service is this scenario. People go, okay, but I'm not selling watches or whatever it may be, right? But I would argue that if you're an investment house, right, or you're a law firm, you need customer service. Like when a client
Oh yeah,
calls,
I can speak to that
knowing,
firsthand.
right, absolutely. So is this, are they part of my corporate tax group, or like where's this customer even fit in my organization? Right? How big a customer is it? Are they looking to retain more services? What services do they currently own? Because there's nothing worse when you get a client on the phone and you go, and you are, and what do we do for you? It pisses them off, right? So a big part of customer service is being able to just, calling it for what it is to come off as if you've never ever stopped forgetting about this customer. They're always front of mind because you know everything about them as soon as they call. And that use case is universal in sales and client retention and account management and spans into onboarding a new legal client, onboarding a new investor. And that's also kind of related to, I think, one of the use cases that you like, which is certification and recertification.
Right. And another point that you're making is that use case, the customer service use case, especially within the context of legal, right? That's you actually hit on something that is now I'm just remembering because I have an attorney for a probate process that I'm going through with my father's estate, right? And every time I call them, they're like, "What's your customer? Well, what's your thing again? Like, what's your client matter?" And I'm like, if they had something like this, they could literally just use my caller ID and look it up out of a system, right? And then they would know, oh, here's all the documentation we've been waiting for or whatnot.
Doesn't it kind of
So
piss you
that's
off?
and it's a little irritating, right? That I call them, I'm like, guys, I've been working with you for a year. Like, how do you not know who I am? But
Yeah, I wouldn't say that
this
you
is
would
the
rage
reality of the
out on the
situation.
topic, but this is
Yeah,
the endless frustration all customers of every service, even if it's a customer
right.
of professional services. But I
And
just
it
wanted to beat
applies
that
to
drum a
every
bit.
size. Yeah.
Yes,
No, I'm
every
glad you
size,
did because
pretty much every industry.
every customer size, right? Every
Right.
whether you have 100,000 employees and 1 million customers, or you have 10 employees and 100 customers, it's the same challenge every time. It's who am I talking to, and how do I know everything I need to know about them so that they're comfortable dealing with me on the phone, and I can get their stuff done right away. Um, so yeah, but you mentioned certification and
Yeah,
recertification
it seems like a bit of a
as well.
segue, eh?
Yeah, this
Or
is
client
another one of
onboarding,
those pieces. Yeah, this is another one of those pieces where you can bring together a lot of these tools in the stack, right? So just to kind of frame this really quick, right? So you have your customer service use case, and that's all great, right? And so you're getting all this information in real time about who you're talking to, and you can also set this up for your executives as well. Joe, you, for example, as the leader of the company, right? You need to know certain things about accounts. And the faster you can get that information, the more effective you can be when you're working with them, right? So it's not just customer service, but it also stands to note, I want to expand on that as well before we move on, that it's also an executive level decision making tool beyond just frontline customer service. So it helps with visibility across the board. But to kind of dovetail into the certification and the recertification process, so you have all this data, who has access to it? And how do you know that the access levels are appropriate, right? So this is one of those things where a tool like Teams and SharePoint is going to be extremely powerful in helping you make those decisions and help you decide and help you confirm and know whether or not a resource is actually, protected and it's only accessible to its given audience. And the teams in the SharePoint play have been huge, and they've been working together very well for a long time. You can always bring in things like Power Automate flows and Power Apps that sit on top of that to sort of mix and match that information together. But the concept of recertification is when I go and I audit access to something, how do I generate that report, right? And so there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can bring in tools from the Graph API and you can query the graph, the Microsoft Graph, which is the sort of, that's like the Dataverse of APIs, right? It goes across the entire M365 stack. And it will give you information about every product and tool that you have access to. And so you can read out access control lists from different files and different libraries and teams and channels and things like that. And you can put together these reports, and there are also some third-party tools out there that can help you with this. And then you can run those reports through tools like Power Automate, where you're processing Excel files or you're reading through the contents of these documents, and you're making automated decisions at a point in time that it gets generated. And so what you're doing is you're essentially automating your audit process, which is that's kind of the holy grail. And this is something that we've talked to, we see is very common in financial services, where they have a lot of data and information that they have to keep protected, and they have to prove that it's protected every so often. And, if you can do that in an automated fashion where you're leveraging tools like Power Automate to do that inspection for you and then to essentially alert you when you need to take action rather than you having to go through and manually read everything, not only are you eliminating a lot of that manual labor, but you're also eliminating a lot of that risk of you missing something as you go through.
And does certification, recertification have anything to do with like new client onboarding? Are they at all kissing cousins
Well, yes
or
and
no?
no. I mean, they kind of are, because the certification process of making sure that access is valid always has to come at the beginning of when you're onboarding a vendor or you're onboarding a client. You have to set up your environment so that it's actually certified for access, that the certain people can access that, right? And you've got a product that does that automatically, which is insanely helpful. And then the recertification process is, of course, the auditing of that later on.
Yeah, so it sounds like to have one would make sense to have the other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't just set up access rights and then assume that they're correct for the rest of time, right?
Right,
you
fair enough.
you'd set up access and then you have to recertify because you have to make sure that in the future, later on, that the access controls are still valid at the current point in time.
And so at this point, we've discussed quite a bit, some high level use cases and the like. And what I'm thinking, Christian, is why don't we set up some more time, maybe either a webcast or a podcast where we can go a bit deeper into everything from the Dataverse and a couple of these use cases and maybe some additional use cases. That sound like a plan?
I think that would be fun. Yeah.
Want to thank everybody if you did stop by to listen today. Any questions about what we discussed today? Anyways, obviously, we can help drive value for your investment in Microsoft 365. Please do reach out. We're always happy to engage customers. Most importantly, we really do have a passion about building solutions above and beyond everything else. And would love the opportunity to work with anybody out there who found what we say today interesting. So thank you again, and talk to you next time.